Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
We're going to give these boys the big picture of life. We're going to help them to understand how boys are different and what they need to do in order to guard and protect themselves as they're developing their character. They've got to understand their developing brain.
Traditionally, God's design for sexuality has been presented as a list of do's and don'ts, especially the don'ts. The story of God's design for sexuality is much more compelling than a list of behaviours. We need to talk about pornography, God-honouring intimacy, and purity in a highly sexualised world. Our guest today and good friend of Focus is Dr. Alan Meyer, the co-founder of Careforce Life Keys. We'll be discussing the impact of pornography on the brain, how to prevent it from destroying your life, and how to create a vision of purity in a highly sexualised world. That's Dr. Alan Meyer, along with my wife Kate, and I'm Brett Ryan for Focus on the Family, Australia. And due to the nature of today's topic, we give a little ears warning. Well, welcome to the program.
Thanks, mate. It's good to be with you.
We are so thrilled to be talking about this topic, but many people may have not come across or had the privilege, like we have. Who is Alan Meyer?
Wow. That's a good question. Who is he? Well, Al Meyer is just another man who had an encounter with God in his teenage years. I was born Australian and grew up in Melbourne. Always wanted to be a teacher, and at the age of 19 in my Lutheran church I had an encounter with God, and over that week God called me into the ministry. I was training at Monash University at the time and completed that training, was posted out to Lilydale High School, and for 7 years I taught in a state high school environment. And it was over those years that the call of God just began to catch up with me, and increasingly has had a compassion for young people, particularly watching them just live self-destructive lives. And there came a moment when I said to my wife, we can't know what we know and remain silent. So we invited kids to come to our house on a Friday night, and on the first night 35 of them turned up. And for the next 5 years I would play my guitar, the kids would hang out in the house, playing games, do whatever they want, and for 15 minutes I would talk with them. And over those years we had a revival in our high school. I baptised 35 of those students in my backyard, and a number of the teachers as well, and then was called from there into full-time ministry as a youth pastor with at Life Ministry Centre in Melbourne. Spent a number of years at Life Ministry Centre, then had the privilege of being called to a Church of Christ in Mount Evelyn Church of Christ, and my wife and I served there then for the next 26 years, and that's kind of really where our story with Careforce Life Keys developed.
And the number of different courses you have, but one of those ones that many people have heard is called Valiant Man. So tell us about Valiant Man.
Well, it comes out of this issue of recognising that sex is one of the most potent dynamics in human experience. And yet, often church has been totally unwilling to speak about it. It raises a question of sexual discipleship. When Jesus said, go make disciples, it includes your sex life. And I was raised in a Bible-believing church, and in 27 years never heard a single message on sex. And that's just inappropriate, especially in a world where, the sexual pressure from culture is extraordinary. I served in the high school campus, and when you ask the question, well, who needs sexual discipleship, the answer is pretty much everybody. Young singles need it. I watched it in the high school campus. I watched kids see their lives and the directions of their lives just derailed by a tragic little romance that went wrong. Young singles need it, particularly as they're searching for someone with whom they could spend the rest of their life. They need a lot of coaching with that. Parents need it because they're responsible to help their kids, and often they've had none of that themselves. Single again, adults need it, especially where they've been married and through divorce or death, they're now single again and they didn't get any help the first time round. Now they're in a more complex world and a more complex age, trying to sort that out. They need it. Men need it. Men need it more than anybody else. And that's what gave rise to the Valiant Man course. It's not that women don't need it, it's that men need more. Married people need it. We make the assumption that married people can have sex. Well, they can read a book. They don't need help. The reality is they do. Survivors of sexual abuse really need a lot of help, because sexual abuse is such a damaging encounter. And then those, particularly in our generation, confused over their gender alignment and over their sexual orientation, they need help.
Yes.
For me, I guess I've initially focused on young singles because of my involvement in youth ministry. But then as I led a church over years, men became perhaps the most important focus of my concern over sexual discipleship, particularly by virtue of the fact that men need more help than anybody. And as Gottman says in his marriage encounters and in his marriage coaching, it's what men do in a relationship that is the key factor as to whether relationships succeed or fail.
Yeah. You mentioned something happened in Toowoomba. What happened?
Yeah, the experience at Toowoomba was an eye-opener and a real stimulus to want to do something more for these young men. My focus had been on older men, particularly married men. But as I heard the stories over that week, including one, for example, where a school had to purchase a bus exclusively for the use of girls because boys were pulling out their mobile phones, suddenly putting pornographic stuff in front of girls' faces and traumatising them. And as a result, they were no longer safe, travelling on the same bus as the boys. And the provocation to me then was somebody's got to do something. Someone needs to create the kind of course that doesn't just address the issue of older men and married men, but the developing brain of these youngsters, because these are the married men of the future.
Yes.
And what they become during their teenage years, some woman will one day have to live with. And the cry in my heart was, give these kids an opportunity, give them a chance.
And it's not necessarily just saying, stop looking at it. It's much more than that. They have to understand what's going on in their mind and in their hearts and into their eye gates.
Yeah, it's an entire vision for manhood, a vision for what a man is and for what a man can be. It isn't about laws and rules, it's about vision. Vision is one of the great principles of building a great life. And I start with the big picture. I think young men need a big picture of life. One of the first things I'm saying to young men is you are not too young to enter into the journey of becoming a great young man.
Yeah.
Now's the time to start. And we know this. There is this key time of brain development in a child between the ages of 10 and 14 in particular, in which there's this furious explosion of connections in the brain. And what gets connected to the pleasure centre of a young man during those critical years between the ages of 10 and 14 will have a profound influence on the way the rest of his life unfolds.
Yeah.
So we start at the beginning. I give him a big picture, the recognition that even at the age of 12 or 13 or 14, you are becoming the man that someone will one day trust. You won't be able to make some great leap to manhood in a day or a week or a month. You become what you are becoming one day at a time, one decision at a time, one action of disobedience or obedience at a time. And I love to give them some insight into the fact that life is critical. When the Chinese were seeking to create a symbol for the word crisis, they came up with two symbols and put them together, the symbol for danger and the symbol for opportunity. And you put those two words together and you have the symbol for crisis. And young men need to know, young man, your life is critical. It is dangerous and it's filled with opportunity. And with good guidance, you can take hold of the opportunity and you can guard yourself from the dangers. The tragedy is we are throwing young people with these developing brains and these developing pleasure centres into a world that is filled with stimulation and almost no vision for the kind of man or woman who could be capable of successfully negotiating the challenges of life.
Yeah.
And so in our first session, we want to talk to them about the critical journey of life. How will you handle your passions? Because our passions are one of the most potent challenges that we face. And we want them to understand God does not want to extinguish their passions. God does not have a heaven made up of extinguished desire. In fact, the Bible says at his right hand there are pleasures forevermore. But our passions and our longings and our desires, they present us with a profound danger at the same time as profound opportunity. And young men and women need help to negotiate that challenge.
Yeah. I think you made note of it, of a young man at the age of 12 said he was beyond help, basically. He said he's too far gone down that abyss of darkness.
Yeah.
But here you're really saying, even if you are in this critical moment, there is hope and an opportunity to change the trajectory that you are going down one path and changing to another.
Absolutely. And sex is one of the great passions, which is one of the great dynamics in human experience. It's one of the most potent of all of the dynamics at work in our humanity. It represents both danger and opportunity. In its fulfillment, it's intended to be magnificent. In its danger, it fills the world with an ugliness beyond description at times.
Yeah.
And we're saying to young men, you are not too young to begin to understand both the danger and the opportunity and begin the process of becoming the kind of man that a woman or a child could trust for the rest of their life.
Yeah, fantastic.
Now, for those listening, you can say, well, that seems very, very scientific. But it's the science that God has created, in the sense that there is something that's going on in our chemistry set in our brains that's causing us to be attracted to this. And we talk about addictions or habitual looking at those images. How do we address that in our own bodies and our own minds and our own gait? What you're saying is we have to have a greater understanding of why we're attracted to this at the same time.
Ignorance is not a plan for life. And that's where the tragedy of the past has been, both in church, in family, and in our community. There have been some areas on which we're silent, and on some areas in which we almost create a deliberate ignorance. Well, ignorance is not a solution. Ignorance is not a plan for discipleship. Discipleship is about developing truth, an understanding of what's true, and then yielding your heart to what's true one day at a time and developing the kind of character in which truth is not a difficulty, it's a delight. But it takes training, because we all know that bad habits can be developed just as profoundly as good ones. And the reality is that you can't build great marriages, great families, you can't build great governments, great communities and great churches on bad habits. You've got to build them on character. And as a result, young men need to know, for example, that they are different. Boys are different. And that's the second session that we deal with in this course.
This is so good. We're speaking with Dr. Alan Meyer from Careforce Life Keys. He's our guest today for Focus on the Family, Australia.
The Word for Today is Australia's most widely read daily devotional, designed to give you practical teaching to keep you focused on your relationship with Jesus. Read it online or subscribe to the free printed edition at thewordfortoday.com.au.
Well, welcome back. We're speaking to Dr. Alan Meyer from Careforce Life Keys, and you're listening to Focus on the Family, Australia. Just a little while ago, before the break, we started talking about the difference between boys. They're different than girls. When you say it's not just anatomically different, it's, the way that our brain is wired. What other things do they need to know about why they're so different?
Well, they need to know, first of all, how they're different. And again, one of the challenges we face in our generation is that in many ways there's almost been an ideological commitment to say there's no difference between men and women. That partly has come out of the desire for women to feel like they are as appreciated and as valued and seen as
equal. I mean, we talk about equality.
Exactly.
Rather than the uniqueness that both genders bring.
Exactly. And as a result, they've kind of fought for that. And one of the ideological views is to come out with the idea that there are no differences between men and women. And then at other times in some of the popular perspectives on males and females, you go, men are from Mars, women are from Venus. And it's an overstatement of the case. That is simply not the case. The difference isn't so profound that we're from different planets, but the difference is profound enough for us to need to understand it. And in the realm of sex, it's one of the most important areas.
Yeah.
So young men just need to understand that things have happened to them in the womb that never happened to any of the girls that were in utero. They need to understand that their brains were rewired in ways that girls' brains never were, and that produces a sensitivity to testosterone, and it produces a sensitivity in terms of their sight. It means that the chemistry set in the brain that's responsible for sexual arousal was framed by testosterone, and that means that it has a relentlessness about it that women simply don't have to live with in general. And it also creates an environment where the eyeball becomes a significant challenge for a young man in ways that it doesn't seem to be for a whole population of women. There may be some women who are excited by sight, and I've had no hesitation to say this. Thank God that by and large women are not primarily sexually aroused by what they see, because if they were, most of us would never get lucky in our entire life.
But I think there's something, a little pause there. It's not, like for women who may be listening to this, my husband, he always appears that sex is on his brain all the time. He's always thinking about it. But even just to have that understanding and appreciation that it's just the way that we've been designed is a sort of an opportunity to say, that makes sense now. It's not that he's always thinking about it. It's just the way that he's wired or hardwired in such a way. Doesn't mean that it actually should cause them to force or, to justify some of their poor decision making, but it is a greater understanding.
Well, males do need to appreciate the fact that, firstly, they will be easily aroused and easily attracted by sight. It's why pornography is so immensely attractive to males. Now, it can become attractive to females if they are socialised into it, but men don't have to be socialised into pornography. And it's because it's biochemistry. But hang on, aren't these Christian boys, don't they believe in Jesus? And the answer is yeah, but they've got the same body as everybody else.
Yeah.
They're not just a spirit. And this is one of the things that we seek to help the boys to understand, that when you understand a Christian view of a human being, you're not simply dealing with a spiritual being, you're dealing with this extraordinary mixture of body and spirit that results in a personality or a soul. And the Christian boy who has Christ within has exactly the same hormones and the same brain and the same hardware and all of the same hormonal responses that anybody would have, and it doesn't go away because you came to know Jesus when you were 5 years of age. Now, it modifies the way you express it, but it's all there. And so boys do need to know, firstly, that they are different, that their eyes are going to need to be guarded. And Jesus knew that. When Jesus said, you've heard it was said by them of old time, you shall not commit adultery. I say to you, whoever looks at a woman and lusts after her in his heart has committed adultery already. And then he goes on to say, the eyes are the window of your soul.
Yeah.
If your eye is good, the whole body will be good. If the eye is bad, eyes are critical for boys.
Yeah.
And as a result, they need some discipleship about how they use their eyeballs. And secondly, they also need to recognise that because they are fueled by testosterone, which is not the hormone that defines womanhood, males are defined by this, which means, number one, they're going to be stronger and therefore they're more dangerous. Secondly, it's the hormone of risk, daring and aggression, which means they have to be helped to contain themselves and learn to contain their strength. And they need to be helped to constrain themselves in the risk and the daring. Boys damage themselves. Boys have this tendency to do very dangerous things, and it's why women live longer than men, because men do dumb things. And then they live with the hormone of libido. Women don't live with that. Testosterone is the hormone of libido. Women live with levels of testosterone between 4 and 20 times lower than the man they live with. And as a result, males live with a sense of a sexual drive that is somewhat relentless. It just doesn't go away. And thoughts about sex that are intrusive. And if they don't learn to handle those, they can begin to identify themselves as being an inadequate human being. There's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
The answer is nothing wrong with you. You're just a boy and you need help to manage it. Because in the influence of a highly sexualized and eroticized environment, that includes a relentless mixture of pornography. Boys are set up to discover the power of pornography and the stimulation of the pleasure center, and that puts them on a pathway of developing brain tracts, which for them are going to be very significantly different.
This course really is not only for the young men to understand how they're wired, but it's also for parents to understand how their child is wired. If a parent's listening to this or a church is listening to this, where do they need to go?
No, it's a great question, Brett, and it raises the issue of how do we actually help young men and how can parents help their young men? Okay, there are a number of things we need to do. Firstly, young males are clearly vulnerable.
Yeah.
And as a result, they need support. They don't just need rules, they need support. Secondly, they need to understand, and their parents need to understand, the nature of that vulnerability and then the steps that they could take together in terms of guarding what they see, the way in which they're beginning to learn the behaviours and the responsibilities of young manhood. And all of this goes to the core of what Focus on the Family has always been on about. It's educational, it's putting tools in people's hands, and the very purpose of this course is to create a tool which could be in the hand of every parent, it could be in the hand of the young men that they're seeking to give some guidance and help, and together forming an encouraging community in which young men grow up with wisdom and with understanding, and the parents who are helping them have broken the silence and they're doing the journey together.
Yeah. There is so much rich content that we've discussed, and there's a whole lot more we could be discussing into the future, and would love to have you back as a guest. But in our final few moments, what would you like to be saying to the church leader, the mum or dad, the school, or even a young person who's listening to this and saying, that's me?
Well, this was an experiment, Brett. I made a decision that somebody ought to have a go at creating a course for boys. I began to create it. We gathered together a group of a dozen boys of different ages and sat them around the table, and we just had an experiment and had a go. And over the first couple of nights, it became really clear they felt like somebody has broken the silence. Somebody's telling me stuff I have never heard before in my life. And with that, by the way, such an amazing level of transparency.
Yeah.
They were open. They wanted to hear. They were eager. So we're framing it. We're going to give these boys the big picture of life. We're going to help them to understand how boys are different and what they need to do in order to guard and protect themselves as they're developing their character. Thirdly, they've got to understand their developing brain. They've got to understand the pleasure center, and they've got to understand how to manage that well, especially in these teenage years. We're going to talk about the problem of pornography, the mirror neurons, about the problem of getting adrenaline mixed up with their arousal and how that can so easily lead down a pathway of perversion and then create problems that they'll wish they never had. They don't have to be that way. We're going to give them a vision of manhood, that sex is holy, and how to develop the wisdom part of their brain to manage the passions that they have. And we're going to talk to them about that great process of how do you become a man? Well, Jesus, by the age of 12, was in a position to say, I see my calling. And to every young man, we're going to show you how to develop the vision, the convictions, the discipline, and the endurance that can make for the kind of young man that any woman could trust. You're going to become the kind of man that the woman you're looking for is looking for.
Yeah,
We're so pleased that you are having a go and being successful. Thanks for joining us today.
God bless, mate.
Our guest today has been Dr. Alan Meyer, and if you'd like to find out more about Young Valiant Man and other resources, you can go to careforcelifekeys.org. And if you're listening to this and something has triggered something in you and you'd like someone to talk to or to provide some extra resources, including a free PDF resource called Digital Pornography Addiction, please visit our website at families.org.au. Our free pastoral care service and resources have only been made available because of the generosity of people like you. We are so appreciative of those that financially give and pray for the ministry. Please consider partnering with us so we can help more Australian families thrive in Christ. And thank you for joining us today on behalf of Kate and the rest of the Focus team. I'm Brett Ryan, inviting you to tune in to another edition of Focus on the Family, Australia.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.